The terrifying story I am about to share with you tonight took place in a small village in Surin Province. This event occurred roughly 20 years ago. Let me tell you, I consider this story to be the most frightening one of the week, or maybe even of the entire month. If you're curious about just how chilling and suspenseful this tale is, let's dive into it together. And of course, if you want to make the atmosphere even more eerie, I suggest you turn off the lights, creating the perfect setting. Close your eyes and let your imagination bring the scenes I'm about to describe to life. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. This story centers around Freya, and it dates back about 20 years. At that time, Freya was living with her family in a small village, a rural countryside community. Imagine, if you will, a village in a remote area with only a few homes scattered around. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the houses were old, traditional wooden houses on stilts with open spaces underneath, a familiar sight in the countryside. On the day this incident took place, it was an ordinary day. However, Freya noticed something unusual. She said that she began to smell a terrible, rotting odor. The smell had been lingering since the early morning, and she tried to locate its source, but it was nowhere to be found. At first, she thought it might be an animal carcass, maybe a dead cat or rat, but after searching around her house, she still couldn't find the source. Eventually, Freya stepped out to the front of her house. In rural areas like this village, houses often don't have fences, so people could freely come and go without concern for theft, as everyone knew and trusted each other. Standing in front of her house, Freya took a deep breath, trying to trace the direction of the odor. It seemed to be coming from the house across the road. Before I continue with the story, let me share some background about the house across from Freya's. This house used to belong to an elderly man who had lived there alone for many years, as his wife had passed away long ago, even before Freya was born. Freya only knew the elderly man, and he was known for being particularly stern. His children feared him greatly, as he would get angry and loud over even the smallest mistakes. Because of his harsh nature, his own children eventually left him. However, when they left, they did not go alone. They left behind two of his grandchildren. At the time, these two grandchildren were still very young, around 3 years old. Freya knew the two children well, as they had lived across from her house and had played together since they were young, becoming close friends over the years. As time passed, Freya's neighbors, the two grandchildren, grew up to be around 15 or 16 years old. The girl's name was Kylie, and her younger brother was named Liam. Neither of them had ever attended school, as their family was very poor. Their grandfather, now elderly and unable to work, had no way to afford schooling for them, so both of them grew up without an education. When they reached their teenage years, around 18, the elderly grandfather fell ill. Despite his sickness, Freya would still hear him angrily scolding his grandchildren daily. His stern nature remained unchanged, even in his weakened state. Then, one day, the inevitable happened. The grandfather passed away in his own home. After his passing, Kylie and Liam were left to live alone in the house. As they grew older, Liam, being a young man, began to act out, drinking and doing drugs. He even began stealing from neighbors' homes. At first, the villagers were lenient, thinking he was just a misguided youth. But as time went on, Liam's behavior escalated. His drug use became more severe, and he continued breaking into homes, causing greater and greater trouble. The final straw was when he attempted to assault a young woman from the village, though he was stopped before he could carry it out. Following this incident, the village chief reported Liam's behavior to the authorities, and he was forced to leave the village. From then on, Kylie was the only one left living in the house. Everything seemed calm and quiet after that, and Kylie, alone in the house, went about her life without incident. Time passed, and Kylie turned 20, now fully grown. Freya mentioned that she had noticed something strange about Kylie's demeanor in recent months. Her expression and gaze appeared troubled, as though she carried a heavy sadness. But Freya hadn't inquired further, respecting Kylie's privacy. Then, after about 5 or 6 months, Freya found out that Kylie was pregnant. She didn't know who the father was, as she had only ever seen Kylie alone. Upon learning of the pregnancy, Freya went over to talk to her, asking, "Oh, Kylie, are you pregnant? How far along are you?" Kylie replied, "About 6 months," but her responses were marked by a deep sorrow, as if she didn't want to talk about it at all. Freya refrained from asking further about the child's father and left it at that. Eventually, Kylie gave birth. Every day, she would come downstairs, carrying her newborn to the space beneath the house, where she would lay the baby in a cradle and gently rock it. Freya often saw Kylie sitting beside the baby, but she still hadn't seen or heard anything about the father. A couple of months passed. Then, one day, Freya caught that same terrible, rotting odor coming from Kylie's house, prompting her to investigate. As she approached the house and got closer to the space underneath, the smell grew stronger, making her stomach turn. She called out for Kylie but received no response, making her think Kylie might not be home. Freya took a peek into the cradle, expecting to see Kylie's baby. The sight that greeted her was horrifying. She saw Kylie's baby, pale and motionless, lying lifeless in the cradle. Its body was covered in flies, and the smell of decay was overpowering. The baby had soiled itself and remained in the cradle, neglected. In shock, Freya ran home and told her parents what she had seen. She told them that Kylie's baby had died beneath the house and that something terrible had happened. It appeared the baby had been dead for several days, as the body was already decomposing. Freya's father immediately rode his motorcycle to inform the village chief. The chief then broadcast an announcement, calling all villagers to gather urgently at Kylie's home. Soon, everyone arrived, creating the tense atmosphere of an impromptu village meeting as they came together to address the tragedy unfolding in their community. The village headman asked if anyone had seen Kylie, but everyone responded that they hadn't. Even Freya, who lived in the house opposite, hadn't seen her. Normally, Kylie would come down under her house to take care of her child, but in the past few days, Freya hadn't seen Kylie at all. At that point, the village headman asked everyone to help search for Kylie. They searched from 10 in the morning until late in the afternoon, but no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't find her. Eventually, the villagers involved in the search began to lose hope. They told the village headman that maybe Kylie had run away from the village since they'd searched the entire place and couldn't find her anywhere. By then, everyone was starting to give up hope. However, one of the elderly women happened to glance at a small bamboo hut beside Kylie's house. This small hut was built for storing farming equipment, and the door wasn't fully closed. The elderly woman spoke up, asking if anyone had checked the hut to see if Kylie might be in there. The moment she suggested this, everyone's attention turned to that hut. The elderly woman volunteered to go and check it out. As soon as she slightly opened the door, she suddenly fell backward and fainted. The villagers were shocked and immediately rushed over to help her. When they looked inside the hut, what they saw shocked everyone. Inside was Kylie's body hanging by the neck from a beam in the hut. Her body was completely pale with no blood. Her head was swollen, bruised, and purple. Her tongue protruded from her mouth, and her eyes were bulging. The floor beneath her was soaked in urine. Her lifeless body swayed gently from the beam, a sight that deeply disturbed everyone who witnessed it. The image was truly horrifying, and it imprinted itself on everyone's minds. Imagine the state of a body that has been hanging for 2 to 3 days. That's what Kylie's body looked like. The rope she used wasn't an ordinary rope, but a thick, heavy-duty rope used for pulling carts or hauling things. It was a very thick rope. After this horrific discovery, the incident became a big deal, and the village headman quickly rode his motorcycle to inform the police. None of the villagers at the scene dared to cut the rope or touch the body because everyone was overwhelmed with fear. After the police came and completed their investigation and all the necessary formalities, arrangements were made for a funeral according to local customs. Since Kylie didn't have any family in the area, the villagers pooled some money to invite a monk to perform a funeral ceremony at Kylie's house. They held a single night of chanting, followed by cremation on the same night. The cremation was conducted in a traditional manner, with a funeral pyre built next to Kylie's house. After the funeral was over, Kylie's house became deserted as no one was willing to live there anymore. At first, everything seemed normal and nothing unusual happened. However, about 7 days after Kylie's death, strange things started to occur. The villagers in the area reported that around nightfall, around 8 or 9 p.m., they often heard the sound of a woman crying and sobbing. The crying was incredibly mournful, and the more they listened, the more it gave them chills. As this continued, the villagers around that area began to avoid going outside in the evenings. Kylie's house became a topic of conversation throughout the village, with people saying it was haunted. The crying was heard nearly every night. Then, one night, sometime past midnight, nearly 1 a.m., when the entire village was silent and all the lights were turned off, Freya's mother had stomach pain and had no choice but to go to the bathroom, which was under the house as is typical in rural areas. As she was about to descend the stairs, she glanced over at Kylie's house across the street. At that moment, she saw Kylie standing under a jackfruit tree by her house, rocking her child in her arms. Just as Freya's mother's eyes focused on her, Kylie turned her gaze and locked eyes with Freya's mother. The two stared at each other, with Kylie continuing to rock her child. At that instant, Freya's mother fainted right on the spot. The sound of Freya's mother collapsing was so loud it echoed throughout the entire wooden house. Hearing the noise, Freya's father woke up and saw her mother lying unconscious on the floor. He tried to wake her, but she wouldn't respond. In a rush, Freya and her father managed to carry her mother to their motorcycle and took her to the district hospital. When she finally regained consciousness, she recounted everything she had seen, just as I've shared with you. Her story quickly spread through the village, and since then, when night falls, silence overtakes the village, broken only by the sound of Kylie's sobbing. About a month later, an investor came with plans to buy soil from the land near the village, intending to fill in other areas. The soil was to be taken from a location near a canal, about 20 to 30 meters behind Kylie's house. 2 truck drivers were assigned to transport the soil, loading it from mid-morning to early evening. During the daylight hours, nothing out of the ordinary happened, and the 2 truck drivers were entirely unaware of the tragic events that had taken place in the village. As night fell, The two truck drivers prepared to sleep in their trucks, ready to resume work in the morning. After they had dozed off, one of them suddenly heard a noise, a dragging sound, like KRRT, KRRT, KRRT. He woke up quickly and nudged his partner, asking, "Hey, did you hear that? What is that noise?" His partner responded, "Sounds like someone's dragging something. Maybe a thief's trying to steal something from the truck. Go check it out." As they spoke, they began hearing a woman sobbing, along with the sound of someone soothing a baby. The woman's voice was a blend of sobs and gentle coos, a combination that grew closer and closer. At the same time, the dragging noise continued unabated. The two men looked at each other in horror and decided to get out of the truck to investigate. As they stepped outside, they saw a woman dressed in a traditional sarong, holding a baby and walking toward them. They soon realized the source of the dragging sound. It was the thick rope hanging from the woman's neck, the same rope that Kylie had used to hang herself. As she walked, the rope dragged along the ground, producing the unsettling noise the men had heard. The two drivers were terrified. They bolted from the scene, leaving the truck behind. The next morning, when the investor arrived, he found the truck abandoned with its doors left wide open. He instructed his workers to track down the drivers. Eventually, they managed to find one of the drivers, but his appearance was shocking. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken and ringed with dark shadows, and his demeanor revealed someone who had been through a traumatic experience. He was visibly shaken, unable to focus or respond coherently, and was trembling and paranoid. The driver refused to continue working, saying he would never sleep in the truck overnight again, nor wait until morning to dig soil. He described the entire terrifying encounter to the investor and to the villagers, confirming that Kylie's spirit was still lingering. After this incident, Kylie's house was left abandoned and villagers grew increasingly fearful of it. As the stories of these events spread, the villagers went to the village headman, desperate for a solution. They told him that these haunting events had disrupted their lives. Previously, some villagers had relied on nighttime fishing to make a living, catching fish to eat or sell. But now, none of them dared to venture outside their homes at night. At that point, the village headman called a meeting and proposed, "If we gather our funds to invite monks to perform a merit-making ceremony to help Kylie's spirit move on, what does everyone think?" All the villagers agreed, and one person suggested, "Since the house is abandoned and empty, maybe we could dismantle the wood and offer it to the temple." Everyone felt the same. It seemed like a good plan to hold a ceremony for Kylie's spirit and donate the wood to the temple. When the monks came to perform the merit-making, everything proceeded peacefully without incident. However, what I'm about to share will reveal the reason Kylie ended her life. When the villagers began dismantling her house, they discovered a wooden box. Inside, they found a set of papers handwritten by Kylie. It was essentially her diary. As they read through it, they found not a single happy entry. Each page was filled with words of despair, expressing a deep inner suffering. This is where everything became clear. Kylie had been pregnant because her own younger brother, Liam, had violated her. When she realized she was pregnant, there was no safe option for an abortion at that time, so she carried the pregnancy to term and eventually gave birth. 2 months after the birth of her child, trapped in poverty and barely able to take care of herself, let alone a baby, Kylie reached her breaking point. With no way to provide for her child, no food, no milk, and no support, alongside the trauma she had endured since childhood, she saw no other option but to end her own life. After the villagers finished dismantling the house and the monks completed the ceremony, no one in the village heard the sounds of crying, lullabies, or saw any sign of Kylie's spirit again. It was assumed that her soul had finally moved on. Following these events, life in the village returned to normal. Villagers once again felt comfortable going out to make a living at night. About a year later, people in nearby areas began to spread rumors about Liam, who had since fallen into madness. He was seen wandering in a disheveled state, speaking incoherently, his hair unkempt and his appearance deteriorated. He was completely unhinged, a broken man. It's likely that his mind had deteriorated from drug abuse, causing lasting damage to his brain. Or perhaps, if one considers karma, he was finally suffering the consequences of his own actions. This is the full story that Freya encountered in a village in Surin. I would say that, while the story has its share of horror, the tragedy of Kylie's life is overwhelming. Imagine if you were in Kylie's position, what way out could you find? She had no one to confide in, faced all this on her own, and was left with the responsibility of raising a child alone. Adding to her struggles, her family situation was bleak. Her parents abandoned her at a young age, her grandfather was strict and scolded her constantly, and her own brother, the one she should have been able to trust, violated her, leading to her pregnancy. This story is beyond sorrowful. It's terrifying, yes, but it's deeply heartbreaking as well. Kylie's story deserves our compassion. If any of you have listened to the end, feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts. I'll be sure to read and respond to each one as always. And if you're new here and enjoy these chilling stories, I'll see you again on another night. For now, good night, everyone.